This video discusses sensitive topics related to abuse. Listener discretion is advised.
They're not only grooming that individual, they're grooming the parents, they're grooming the community at large.
Any one particular person's issue is everyone's issue. It's an actual public health crisis that we're not even talking about as such.
If you're using that quote unquote locker room talk, somebody in there has perpetrated and has sexually harmed somebody. They're now thinking it's okay because you've just made it okay.
I'm Caroline Culbertson, and I am here with 3 subject matter experts to unpack the themes of the PSA that we just saw. Kenyora, so often when victims of misconduct or abuse disclose or tell somebody about their experience, they are met with questions. They're met with skepticism, questions like, were you drinking? What were you wearing? Immediately sort of trying to place skepticism or blame on the victim. Why do you think that blaming the victim is so often the knee-jerk response?
I like to think, and what I tend to come across is, I think a lot of people haven't figured out their own traumas. And so there's a lot of projection that happens onto victims, and instead of offering support, there's that victim blaming that comes in place where we talk about, what were you wearing? Why were you there? How much did you have to drink? Why did you get in the car with this person? Versus saying, why did that person abuse their power? I think that's the question we should be asking versus placing the onus back onto the victim or survivor, however they identify themselves. Because I think it then allows that person to, one, then feel believed when that person is saying, how can I help support you? What do you need in this moment? Because those are the other questions we should be asking someone who discloses versus the what are you wearing pieces. Because it allows you to open up the door to say, not only do I believe that person who's disclosing to me, but however which way they want to go about their survivorship journey, I've opened that pathway for them towards healing, however that looks for them.
Yeah. Tracy, we so often hear this rhetoric when victims come forward, like, maybe she's making this up to ruin his career, or, groups even coming together to actually rally behind the aggressor. And in that discussion, there sometimes comes up this concept of false reporting. And the data shows us that false reports of sexual abuse or misconduct or violence are in the overwhelming minority. So what would you say to those skeptics who focus on that very, very small anomaly and helping them understand that this is the overwhelming reality for so many victims?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things. I think that if you're focused on that small percentage, why not focus on the large majority that is so often covered up, right? And that survivors don't always come forward because of a lot of that stuff. I also actually started my career as a therapist for adolescent sex offenders. Every one of them denied first.
Wow.
So, and I think that you can see that with celebrity cases, with high profile cases of they deny until they can't. Or they make up some kind of, well, I had sex, but it was consensual or whatever it is. And that's all part of the sexual assault cycle. That is all part of the cognitive dissonance of how they made it okay in their own minds, speaking of the perpetrator. And so a lot of times we have a hard time thinking that our friends and our families could be a perpetrator. And so going back to the victim blaming, you ask somebody what they were wearing because you can't figure out why this person that you know would do something so terrible, because we think about it as strangers. And so you say, I know this person couldn't do this bad thing, so it must have been something that the victim did. This person couldn't do that bad thing, so of course the victim is false reporting. And that's why we have this stigma of that. And rather than focus on false reporting, I mean, a lot of times it's the false reporting of men. Men are more likely to be sexually abused in college than they are to be falsely accused of sexual assault. And yet we don't focus on the sexual assault of men and boys as much. But that's a real statistic.
Wow. Abby, I'd like to understand a little bit through the lens of kind of the sporting community and the sporting world. Another way that we place skepticism on victims is saying things like, well, if it was so bad, why did it take you so long to come forward? Why didn't you report it right away? And we saw this question come up in this PSA as well.
Yeah.
Can you unpack this for us and why people might be so hesitant to report or disclose their abuse?
I think there's a lot of, I say this kind of generally because, I think each individual has their unique experience and they have their different reasoning. But generally we see, in the sporting community, there's that competition, there's a competitive spirit. I mean, we see major brands like Nike saying, just do it, work through the pain, work through the suffering, and you'll achieve your goals. And we see kind of, even from grassroots all the way up to the elite level, that's the messaging that we're giving the athletes, tough it out, work through your pain, work through the suffering, and you'll achieve your goals, you'll win. Gold is, what we're going for. Winning is what we're going for. And so we kind of send that message that your personal feelings don't necessarily matter as much as winning. And so I think, part of that is, I don't want to let my teammates down. I don't want to let myself down. I don't want to let my parents or my coaches, all the individuals in my life that have helped me to get to where I am now, I don't want to let them down. I think, in terms of, the delayed reporting, it's processing your individual feelings about it. I think people say, grief isn't linear, healing isn't linear. And so, there are people later in life that are just now being able to have the words to process their experience. And I think there's a large education component around it too, in terms of, I tell people back when I played sports, this isn't something we ever talked about. I got really lucky that I had a great experience. I had great coaches, my parents were involved. And I think, those conversations weren't had as recently as they're starting to become. So I think it's a mixture of those things. But certainly, I think for sporting, it's that competitive, it's the education piece, it's the individual piece of like trying to find the words and the process. And again, that isn't happening immediately for people. And so we see the delayed reporting when it's taking that time. And even just the process of reporting. It's difficult. There's an education piece to it, again, of understanding when I report what's going to happen, how is that going to happen? And again, with the victim blaming of, is this going to be seen as my fault? I think there's a lot of shame and guilt involved when something happens on a personal level. And then it's added pressure of, are people going to see this as my fault? Am I going to be blamed? And we've seen it happen, I think, in the larger, broader culture of that victim blaming. And so people are still, I think, hesitant to come forward because of that as well.
Yeah. And I can also assume, like, as athletes, you're being seen as a machine versus a human. And so you're a machine that's been put to task to just go from the start line to the finish. And then that's it. Like, you're supposed to work your body to the bone, nothing else, nothing more. But if something else happens to get in the way of your championship, sorry, we don't do that because you're just supposed to win, whether it's maybe bronze, silver, but ultimately the gold is what we're looking for. But I wonder about that too. Like, our bodies are being used for championships.
I also think that a lot of times people don't recognize they've been sexually assaulted.
That part too.
And it seems really strange to say, but I think that we think of sexual assault and rape of what we see in the movies, and it's just not the case. And so you have a doctor who's touched you inappropriately, and you think, well, this was a medical procedure. They're telling me this was a medical procedure, and maybe it was not. I didn't think it could happen from my friend, from my coach. I thought my coach was just giving me special attention, especially if there's such an age gap, and I think that...
Especially because they're the coach who's
and they're the coach, right?
So it's empowering you, like, and maybe seen as like a parent figure.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the statistics show is that abuse actually occurs more often from somebody that you know and that you're familiar with versus what we talked about, the stranger danger, things like that. And that's, I think, again, with the thought process of like, well, it couldn't happen to me. Like, I trust this individual. They're a good person in the community. But we see a large number of, the cases coming through are actually somebody that they were very close with or that they were familiar with versus that kind of stranger that just randomly showed up one day and was like, hey, come with me. So yeah.
There's a Child USA statistic that really stands out to me, and it is that for a victim who experienced childhood sexual abuse, their average age for disclosing that abuse is 52 years old.
That's unsurprising.
That really shocked me as someone who is kind of outside of this area of expertise. I want to unpack not just why, because I would imagine it's really multifactorial, but I would like to unpack not just why it takes so long to disclose, but also why someone would choose to disclose their abuse even decades after it happens. Because to me, that just makes me realize it is still haunting them then. Tracy?
You know, I think that especially if the average age is 52, you have to think about what the culture was like 52 years ago or 40 years ago, pre-Me Too, before everybody was talking about this, where you could find support on the internet, on TikTok, on Instagram, and people weren't talking about it. Mm-hmm. And they're still not talking about it enough. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here today, you know? Mm-hmm. And so I think that there was just such a lack of understanding, and it takes a long time to get over that. And you're busy and you have other things to do and you just stuff it. And this is just what we do. And this is what we're taught to be strong, to be whatever. And then there comes a point where you just can't stuff it anymore. Mm. A lot of times for women, that's when you get menopausal and the hormone changes your brain to go, I can't hold this anymore. Mm. And I think that that's a lot of times where it's in that 50-year range. But we've also, you know, for a lot of people, it's Me Too is huge for going, oh, I'm not the only one. This does happen. It's not my fault. Sometimes it also takes the death of the perpetrator for you to come forward, which is why it can take so long.
I think, you know, pointing back to what Tracy said, the cultural kind of stigma, you know, in that time period, it wasn't, you know, widely talked about. It wasn't, you know, something where people found a lot of support. You know, in the sporting community, especially at the elite levels or even down at the grassroots levels, you know, there's certain opportunities that only come through every, you know, so often. And so people have to make a choice between, do I report now and potentially lose opportunities or a livelihood, or do I, you know, keep my livelihood? Do I keep my, you know, opportunities for achieving, you know, whatever goals that I've set as an athlete or an individual? A lot of that comes from having to make that decision and choosing between a livelihood or a, you know, athletic career or reporting, you know, instances of sexual assault or abuse.
Are we seeing some of that delayed disclosure also in, you know, within college situations and people, again, not really understanding kind of what happened to them, but also maybe needing to be out of the environment in which they were abused in order to kind of reckon with it enough that they can disclose?
As a survivor myself, it took me until college before I disclosed to my own mother what happened to me. I was more of a childhood survivor. And if anything, the one thing my mom had wanted to do is protect me from what she had experienced. And I've talked about me and my mom. I have permission for sharing her story too. But it took me a while to say anything to her because, one, I wanted to protect my mother from reliving her own trauma. But I also wanted to make sure my mother didn't go to jail for wanting to go after the person who did what they did to me, because that was the last thing I ever wanted my mother to do and experience. But I think because of that protection, and I'm the only child who grew up with a lot of adults, I was able to compartmentalize a lot of things that have happened to me. And so I think the delay in disclosure didn't really come into play until I got to End Rape on Campus. When I realized, I was like, oh, wait a minute, I'm also a survivor too. It may not have happened on a college campus yet, even though I have experienced sexual assault on college campuses. But I too am a survivor because I never actually had that as part of my my career or part of my, like, the story that I think a lot of people have when they're, oh, why did you become a part of this? And it wasn't because I was a survivor for me. Actually, I came into it because I wanted to make sure that I was building an environment where people were not burning out as easily in this space. because of the vicarious trauma one would go through, still dealing with your own trauma if you're a survivor in this space. And so I wanted to make sure to create and cultivate spaces that allow people to just flourish and be themselves. But now I'm leading on this issue. I'm like, I have to share a little bit about who and what I am and what I've experienced, because I also want people to not feel like they're alone, and to notice that we all don't live in a vacuum. We're not, this perfect profile of a survivor, but it can look like me too.
Yeah.
And I think that was the whole point of the Me Too movement, was to make sure that Black women and women of color were seen as also survivors and victims of sexual assault. And so I think the disclosure and the delay of disclosure comes from the protection, but I think also sometimes you kind of get a little empowered and you say, you know what? I'm going to take charge and take back my own life and say, this is what I've experienced, but also here's what I'm doing about it.
It's so beautiful and heartbreaking to hear you describe yourself as a survivor, because that's a part of your identity that you never planned, that you never wanted. But at some point you had this moment where it became part of who you are and what you bring to the world. How has kind of claiming ownership of that part of your identity and your story changed who you are?
That's interesting. I love that question. I would say, and I don't like to use the words like strong or resilience because I think they're overused. But I like to think that I am someone who's thriving in my wholeness as a person. And because I've been able to compartmentalize since a child and even now, I just take everything one day at a time. But I think I'm also just empowered by other student survivors from the work that we do, and hearing their stories and how they want to go through and navigate through their survivorship journey in a way that allows them to get to healing faster, even though healing is not a linear journey. But they're trying to find ways to get past either the physical assault that they've experienced, or the institutional betrayal that they've experienced, or the family betrayal that they've experienced, because they want to get to like the other side of things. And then sometimes I have to say to them, it's going to take a minute, it's going to take a while, but you're going to get there. And half the time you don't even know you're there sometimes, especially if you're surrounding yourself with other people who are like, you got this, you could do this. I'm going to hold your hand along the way, because no one has to go through this alone at all.
Yeah. Abby, what we're talking about really is a community mentality, and that so often is what we see in the sporting world. Your team is kind of your family. Are you seeing something similar play out in sporting communities, and does what Kenyora was saying, is what she's saying kind of resonate with you from a sporting environment perspective?
Yeah, because I think, when we talk about the delayed reporting or kind of, being hesitant to disclose to your teammates, it's because it's that family environment. Your teammates are your brothers or sisters, and oftentimes a coach takes a position of power, like, I don't want to say a parental role, but, they're the adult, and you have your kind of little family unit, and you go through a lot together. And so I think it takes, what we're seeing is that, more teammates are feeling that they're able to come forward to each other and support each other. But then there's also that kind of hesitation too of like, will I be accepted? Will I be believed? Will this hurt them? I don't want to hurt their chances of, being able to compete. Will this ruin it for everybody? And so I think there's a really great community in team. And then there's also that kind of fear that it creates of, I won't be accepted, or
Like
this
the
could
stakes
hurt
are
them.
higher,
Yes.
because it's not just you. Yeah. We talked a little bit about culture, and Tracy, you sort of pointed to these cultural shifts that are happening. We're still not there yet.
No.
We're still not there yet. And I'm curious if we can talk a little bit about, the current public view around abuse and our tolerance for abusers to maintain status in their communities. I'd like to talk about how that shifts or impacts the victim's perception of what happened to them.
Yeah.
Who wants to start?
Well, I mean, I can start. I think If you've read Dr. Christine Blasey Ford's book, it's an incredible book, and she had accused Justice Kavanaugh of sexual assault. People believed her. People believed that she was a credible witness. They believed that she was a survivor of sexual assault. They didn't believe that Kavanaugh could do it. Mm-hmm. So in the same breath, you're saying she's credible, but it can't be him. Wow. And I think that that really shows it, is that people see this as two different things. They see the perpetrator very separately than the survivor. And I think that's part of the issue, is that so often we talk about sexual assault and we talk about the survivors and we forget to talk about the perpetrators. Mm-hmm. And we forget to talk about how they're beloved and how they're kind and how they've done really good things and they've done really terrible things that they need to be held accountable for.
Yeah. I think it's also the fact that a lot of folks like to think that this is a woman's issue.
It is, yes.
And that's what we typically hear versus like the number one perpetrators are men. Yeah. But it also could be anyone of any identity. And so I think we need to have more education where it's put back on the person who is abusing their power, who's abusing the control that they may have, and putting the onus back on the perpetrator, back on the person. Even though I will say, using the term perpetrator is often kind of sticky too, because there are people who may have done something one time, not even know. And I say that to say I've come across a few students who've actually come straight up to me and say, I'm not sure if I actually sexually assaulted my girlfriend or someone who I was like intimate with. And I'm like, oh, okay, now I'm like, all of this you're about to disclose to me like in a different way, because I'm used to the other side of saying like, here's what happened to me versus someone's like, I'm not sure if I actually did this and I want to know. And I'm like, first of all, good for you.
Yeah,
right.
For actually asking the question, because we're not doing enough education.
Yes.
Especially to young men and to everyone, really. We need more comprehensive sex education from K through 12 all the way through, I would even say grad school at this point. Yeah. But we need more of that education, and we need more men who want to be a part of the conversation as well. Because I think that's the only way we're going to make some sort of difference, some sort of change, and turn the tide, of this, and not make it always be about like, it's a women's issue and the women shouldn't be doing this. And it's like, actually, nobody should be doing this. Mm-hmm. It shouldn't be any one particular person's issue. It's everyone's issue. It's an actual public health crisis that we're not even talking about as such. And it's not in one particular region. It doesn't just happen in the United States. It's a global issue. And that is what we need to be talking about.
I think there's, going back to kind of the larger cultural and societal stuff, I mean, I think we tend to see the sexual assault and abuse, it's people try to fit into a kind of a box, or it's like seen as a black or white issue. Like either somebody's all good or they're all bad. Yeah. And there can't be nuance. Somebody who, we see as a good person, but they did a really bad thing. And so I think people, in trying to justify that kind of dissonance in their head about this individual that they may know and really come to love, or, is a respected individual in the community, I think people don't want to, deal with that kind of gray issue. They either want it to be black or white. Mm-hmm. And if it doesn't fit in that kind of one or the other, all good or all bad, then it's like, well, that individual must be lying about their experience. That probably really didn't happen. Maybe just a part of it happened, but not all of it. And so I think that's kind of one of the larger cultural societal issues is that we have, is that view or that perspective needs to change in terms of it's either this or that. It can't be something in the middle.
And I also wonder too about the fact that if we're not receiving, or we're not on the receiving end of harm, but we do know that person who is reacting or interacting with us in a different way, like, oh, that never happened between me and this person. So you really mean that one did that to you? Oh, no, I don't believe that, because they would never do anything like that to me. And what we forget is like there's this power and control wheel that exists. And that if someone sees a particular vulnerability in someone, they go after that. And it's that vulnerability is an entry point in some ways for folks to put their claws on someone and say, I think I now have this way of getting into you and using my power and control, even in the most subtlest ways.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that we don't talk about either, is like the most minute nuances that exist that people don't realize, like, oh, I'm under this kind of spell or power and control and you don't even realize you're in it until like either something happens or something comes out of that.
Yeah. I also think that we can see it escalate to feel adversarial.
So I've done a lot of work with men in getting them involved in gender-based violence. And I worked with one man. He had been accused of sexual harassment, and I was brought in to coach him, and this was years ago. And he was like, well, it's not all men. I'm like, of course it's not all men, but it's enough of them. And I said, do you have a daughter? And he said, yeah, she's 13. He said, tell me about what you think about her dating. She said, oh, no, she can't date. She can't date. And I said, why? Well, because I know all the guys. I said, all of them? Are all of your friends and all of the boys around her problematic? Well, no. I'm like, so she's learning right now that all men are problems, and she's learning that from you. And he just kind of sat back and was like, you're right. I'm like, so we're learning this because of who you center yourself around and who you see. And that's what your daughter's learning. And that's what we as women are taught from a very young age. And so when are we supposed to discern who's good and who's bad? When some of the most dangerous times for women are in their own relationships.
Yes.
And so, again, I think we need to talk about the perpetrators and the culture and getting men involved and welcoming them to the conversation. Yes. I don't think that a lot of times we welcome men enough. But again, men are survivors too. And a lot of times men don't have the places to go to report. They're in women's centers. They're discussed in a different way. There's a significant amount of homophobia, particularly culturally speaking, historically, that prevents them from telling, because a lot of the perpetrators, most of the perpetrators of men are also men. And so I just think that there's just so many issues there, but it's inviting them and helping them learn.
Yeah.
And the earlier we start with that consent education and that sex education that Kenyora was talking about, the more we change future generations significantly, so much quicker, that they don't have to unlearn something. Because older generations, we have to unlearn stuff before we can relearn other things. And if we teach them at a very young age, they don't have to do the work of unlearning, which is way more difficult.
Tracy, I'm wondering if you can help us understand a little bit, because you've worked with people who have committed sexual violence, sexual abuse, misconduct. I'm wondering if you can help us understand what's happening inside the minds of those people. Like, what is it for this conversation and for, again, bringing men into this conversation who might not know what to ask, and for also for, people who are watching who might be victims or know somebody closely who is a victim? What do we need to understand about their mentality?
Well, first of all, I think it's a spectrum. Just kind of like Kenyora said earlier, that there are men that cause sexual harm and they don't understand that they've caused sexual harm.
Yes.
And then there are men that are predators and are looking to cause sexual harm. So there's a huge spectrum on that we're not talking about. I think that also they have justified in their mind that what they're doing is okay. So many times they don't see it as sexual harm. Even from like high profile cases, well, I was just doing this. I thought she wanted it. And they create this whole scenario about why what they did was okay. And so it's backing up from that and understanding that they're not being called out. People around them are seeing it and nobody said anything. So what I'm doing must be okay. And so that's why we have to understand how jokes connect to bruises, how the culture impacts that, how our media impacts that, how we talk about that, support somebody who is offending. So even if you're not the one offending and you've done nothing wrong, if you're using that quote unquote locker room talk,
Yeah.
somebody in there has perpetrated and has sexually harmed somebody, and they're now thinking it's okay because you've just made it okay. You've laughed at the joke. A lot of times perpetrators and people who cause sexual harm tell you exactly what they've done. If you look at a lot of high-profile cases, they haven't really hidden it.
Yeah. Wow. What you just said really stands out to me because we have this dichotomy of, when children, for instance, are being groomed, there are these small signs that are kind of hiding in plain sight where all these adults around these children are saying that everything is okay because they're not picking up necessarily on the signs because they can be so small and so minute. And so that's kind of like a grant of permission. And so the child starts to think that, oh, this behavior is okay. And what you're bringing to the table, Tracy, is that men who are the aggressors or are perpetrating sexual violence are also in small ways being granted permission that their behavior is okay.
100%.
That's wild.
100%. Yeah.
How do we fight back against that?
The boys will be boys culture.
Yeah.
Yes.
Again, I think it's the education, but I also think it takes men to call out other men and to say this is unacceptable. And it doesn't mean you have to have children in order to call out other men. It just means you want to be surrounded by people who care about other human beings. Yeah. But I think it takes, and it's not just men being, harm doers. I think it takes a lot of people, regardless of who you are and whatever makeup, friendship group, maybe team that you're on or classroom you're in. It takes a lot of us to just come together and say, this is not what we're going to tolerate.
Right.
If we can call each other out on Zoom calls or something, you know what I mean? We can call each other out when we're witnessing a harm that's being done unto someone else. Because I would say 9 times out of 10, someone who calls out another person, the other people who are a witness to that are going to be like, you know what, thank you for saying something because it was right there on the tip of my tongue. Yeah. I just wasn't sure if I should say anything because either they're afraid something's going to happen to them or because they're part of this boys will be boys culture or whatever that culture is that they're existing in. They don't want to be seen as the outside person of that or being different to what the culture has always been. So people like to keep the status quo versus pushing against the grain. And I think we need to do more of that shifting the narrative culture for people to understand that the more we call things out, the more less tolerant I think we will be. And
right now, calling out people, you lose social capital in that, particularly if you're around really toxic people. Yeah. And so we have to have the social capital where calling it out gives you social capital versus taking it away, because we talk a lot about bystander intervention, and a lot of times it doesn't work because you have somebody who's shy, who doesn't have the power to call out the perpetrator, and the perpetrator is usually the one with the power in the room, which is how they're getting away from it. And you're telling other people to call them out. It's not realistic. It's absolutely not realistic. And if they can do that, fantastic. We need more of that. But it's not realistic to expect an 18-year-old freshman to call out a coach, to call out the senior player, to call out the captain of a team for doing something inappropriate, whether it's an inappropriate joke or an inappropriate action. It's just not realistic.
Abby, I feel like this could play out in so many different ways. And we see this so much in, on sports teams, especially. There are sports that men participate in, young men participate in, that have a certain kind of mindset and a certain kind of culture that that sport seems to embody. I'm sure there's lots of nuances, with regard to what team you're on, and certainly people who are involved in that team also help shape the culture. But I have to imagine, there are some sports that are coming to mind for me where this very sort of like macho, it's a man's world kind of culture exists. Yeah. And it strikes me that there are probably leaders or even, players that have some status that could kind of maybe recognize the power that they have, even if it's kind of like a soft, quiet power to just have a little bit of impact there. Yeah.
And I think too, it goes back to the education component a little bit of recognizing a power imbalance. I think there's, certain things that are implied, obviously, like I'm a athlete, you're a coach, and there's a little bit of it implied, like you have a little bit more power than me, but I don't think that there's probably enough education being put out there, but what does a power imbalance really mean? What does that look like? How does it look like, in this team, in this culture of this sport? And it's like you said, it's very unique to each sport. And it's, there are certain sports where it's like, it's kind of like the boys club of, hey, our sport is known for, we go, work hard, play hard, that's how it is. And so I think more education for athletes, for coaches, for parents to recognize those kinds of, inappropriate behaviors, but also when they're very minute. Because I think people look to recognize the big kind of bad behaviors or something very easily recognizable. And a lot of the cases that I see are smaller. It started small.
Yeah.
And oftentimes when individuals are grooming, an individual, they're not only grooming that individual, they're grooming the parents, they're grooming the community at large. And that's, I think, again, going back to that kind of picture of like, this is what somebody looks like. This is what grooming looks like. It has to fit what this is. And if it doesn't, then that's not what it is. And I think so a lot of what I see is people being like, oh, I didn't even realize that was a potential, grooming behavior. He's so, he was a stand-up guy in our community. He goes to church. He does all this. And so I think there's kind of a difficulty in recognizing like even these smaller behaviors, as innocent as they may seem, might not necessarily be that. And I think people are also afraid though of misjudging a certain behavior. Again, like I didn't want to see this as a bad behavior because maybe it was just a nice gesture and I didn't want to accuse them of something false, a false accusation. So it's kind of like, how do we help people kind of navigate that kind of fine line in between of like, that fear of like, I don't want to falsely, accuse somebody of something, but I also want to protect, my team, myself, the individuals around me. So
Yeah. A number of people who will watch this roundtable will remember a time when we didn't have this whole second world to contend with, and that is the digital world. How has the landscape in which abuse can happen changed with the prevalence of the internet and all of our kids being on it and all of our collegiate athletes being on it and all of the adults being on it as well?
Especially young folks who we're not thinking in a digital way how someone can gain access to you because you're basically sitting behind a screen with a bunch of words. And when you can make someone feel good and their vulnerabilities and inhibitions are down, it's like almost like the sky's the limit. Whereas now technology has advanced so much.
So fast.
And you have different platforms that have different ways of accessing and interacting with folks, from Snapchat to Instagram to, I'm saying Facebook, I'm not saying Meta, to Twitter, I'm not saying X, and just all these like entry points to get to folks. And I think even when you have like Snapchat, I'll say, for example, I think you have like 24 hours or something like that to send something to someone. And then that is easily like scrubbed away after those 24 hours. Or you have other platforms where someone can view something one time and it goes away. But when you're talking about even young folks, who are the majority of the people who are using platforms like a Snapchat, you have perpetrators, and I would actually go as far as to say pedophiles, who are on said platforms, who use that as entry points to gain access to the youth, who honestly are just trying to be young people, like, sharing the little things about, what's going on in their world, or trying to be, a part of their peer culture, their peer group. And be, the fun, popular kid, sure. But sometimes you're not seeing that person who, even though you're seeing that little photo profile of a person, you're not sure if they're verified. Right. Their identity has been verified. But as a kid, you don't know those things. And so you just go along, and then you start noticing maybe that person's giving you money or making you feel like you are attractive or maybe sexy or whatever that they're doing to manipulate and coerce you. And then you find yourself as this young person showing certain parts of yourself that you normally would not do, and then are tangled up in this web of mess. But then you're also seeing other types of platforms like a TikTok, where deepfake, and if for those who may be listening to this, deepfake is essentially where someone can take someone's image. And so people can use your likeness and your image in order to make their viewers or audience think that you're doing something that you're actually not and you never gave permission to. And so and thankfully for some of our partners in this field who have actually gone and put some laws in place and wrote some bills to help with that. Because a lot of people are, in the digital space, there's so much nuance. And there's not a lot of laws or policies or protections around that because we're just now coming to understand the power of technology. Than it was. When am I? 37. I think AOL came out when I was in maybe middle school, elementary. I don't even remember. But it's advanced so fast and so quick that we weren't thinking of the things we're thinking of now back then.
Right. Right.
And so just that shifting is what I think we're just now catching up to.
Yeah.
I also think the algorithms are a lot. So there's been experiments done where somebody pretends they're a 13-year-old boy on TikTok and how quickly they see this really misogynistic, abusive women content. And then that's their algorithm, and that's what they're seeing, and so that's what they think everybody else sees because it's 13-year-old,
becomes their view of the
at 18-year-old, at 22 years old, you can't understand that there's more to life outside of you. So you think this is what girls want. You think this is what women want. You think this is how other men act. And I think that can be really dangerous. On the flip side of it, survivors have so many more resources. They can find each other in much different ways with technology like Callisto, with looking on Instagram, with looking on TikTok, finding and Rape on Campus is, social media, finding Callisto social media, I think can be really important and empowering. But I also think, to all the stuff that Kenyora said, we have parents who didn't grow up in the digital age. And I think that that's starting to shift with millennials getting older. But we have so many parents that didn't grow up in the digital age. And so they're like, just shut it off. And you're like, this is a kid's life. Like, it's impossible for them to shut it off. It's impossible for us to shut it off. And so you can't expect that to happen. So parents really need to get better at understanding all of the risks and all of the ways that kids use this and the language and everything else to be able to guide them through it. And they're going to make mistakes, but making sure that they learn the lessons, either from being the bully online or from being the victim of bullying online.
But we're also seeing YouTube is another powerful platform where I'm seeing a lot of younger kids from like K through, I would even say 6. And before we even get to 6th grade, just pre-kindergarten to, I would say, 1st grade, where some parents are giving their child a tablet. And it's like, here, do what you want. And they're scrolling through TikTok, YouTube. And it's these families who are like, having reality shows basically on YouTube that you're paying attention to, and you're hearing like, oh, they seem like innocent enough. And then you're not realizing that some of the stuff that they're doing is also grooming your child.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
And so you find your child on this rabbit hole. But I think thankfully now YouTube, I think, has done a little bit better in terms of parental controls. But I think, again, it speaks to just the advancement of technology, because one platform might be doing this thing, it might be shut down, but another platform is going to pop up. So there's always going to be something new and innovative that is going to get to the brains and the minds of not just youth, but even us. I find myself doom scrolling on TikTok
100%.
All the time.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, aside from like policies that like desperately need to be put in place by these companies that own this technology, and laws around it as well, we don't have the emotional and mental tools, even as adults, to contend with the pressures and the messages that we get and the addiction that we get with this technology. So like, how would we ever expect our kids to do the same?
Exactly.
Abby, I'm so interested in how you see, I mean, you must see this really playing a really powerful role in the work that you do.
Yeah, I mean, we were having a conversation at breakfast, and I kind of made the comment, I'm glad like this kind of technology wasn't around when I was younger, because I was like, the amount of reports that I get that involve digital communication of some sort, whether it's from an athlete to a coach, or a coach to an athlete, or we're also seeing an increase in peer-to-peer bullying and things occurring on these digital platforms. Because again, I think, Snapchat, you're supposed to get rid of, it's supposed to delete your message or your picture in 24 hours. I don't think, kids, especially, again, that kind of like cliche saying of like, once it's out on the internet, it's out there.
Yeah, it doesn't
and it's
really
kind of
go
like,
away.
yeah. So I think that's typical, and even when I was a kid, I was like, oh, they're just full of it. Like that's not the truth.
Absolutely.
And again, I think it's, parents need to be comfortable talking about uncomfortable things.
Yes.
And I think a lot of the education is geared toward girls. Don't share nude photos of yourself. Are you talking to your boys about don't ask for nude photos?
Yeah.
Stop pestering, stop asking, stop, because that pressure is a lot. And you don't really think about all the ways that you can misuse that, or what that can happen, because you're like, oh, it's this person that really likes me that's asking me for this, or they're going to break up with me if I don't. And, there's just a lot of pressures that we didn't have to deal with, that we don't understand that pressure. And so it's understanding as much as possible from that generation. And just like with survivors, believe the pressures, believe them. Don't dismiss it, because they're just going to stop telling you. That's all that's going to happen.
Exactly.
Retaliation happens online as well. If a victim comes forward or shares their experience, sometimes peers retaliate against them. Sometimes people in power retaliate against them. And this can happen on the internet, and often does. It can also happen in person. But let's talk about it happening digitally first. What can that look like? How do we see that play out sometimes?
I mean, it could be as easily as college students, someone engaged in some sort of sexual act, taking a photo of someone and then sharing it and dispersing that out to what they think is a close friend group, and it's only going to be contained, but then it's just sent out like a domino effect out into the ether. And then some folks don't realize, like, oh, that got out beyond just the three friends that I shared it with. Now the entire school may know. So then you see the person who probably didn't even give consent for that photo to be taken in the first place, or video to be taken in the first place. And oftentimes what we've come across actually are folks who are videotaped or photographed when they're intoxicated. And so they definitely have not given consent in that moment. But the person who's taking the photo thinks it's a joke, or it's a part of like, oh, this is going to give me points for, being one of the boys, and it's going to make me more popular because I did this thing because it's funny now. Not realizing, one, not only are you now going to put the person that you photographed or videotaped in this predicament and make them be seen as something they're actually not, but now you're essentially getting ready to set yourself up for failure, because of the fact that once this gets out, and if this person then decides to disclose and report, your whatever you got going on is now going to be put to shambles, because you decide to make this decision in this moment all out of popularity. And so now the scholarship you might have had, or your grades or whatnot that you might have had, are now dwindling, or the scholarship you've lost because now you're involved in this whole process where you're now found responsible for what you've done. And then at the same time, the victim or the survivor who's gone through it has either possibly dropped out, maybe withdrawn from classes, may have now gone into isolation because they now feel this sense of shame, and people are perceiving them, or they think people are perceiving them in certain ways because of this video or photograph that has gone out. And then also probably not even feeling believed by some of their own close friends, because it's like, oh, you shouldn't have been hanging out with this person. It's like, well, I didn't think that this was going to happen to me. Because oftentimes we don't, because usually the person who perpetrates us is someone who's closest to us. It's usually an acquaintance or a close family member. And so we often see people not really understanding the consequences of their actions until it actually unfolds and comes apart.
Yeah. Retaliation can look like retaliation from the person that perpetrated the abuse against you. It can also look like being ostracized from your teammates, from your friends. And again, this can happen in person or online. Tracy, what are some ways that we can identify as a community if this is happening to somebody who has spoken out about their abuse?
I think goes back to education. If you don't know what you're looking for, then you're not going to know.
You're not going to find it.
You're not going to find it. Because every behavior that can look like retaliation can also just look like normal behavior, you know? And so it's watching the changes in a person. Are they not playing well on that team? Are their grades slipping? You know, are they more isolative? Were there friendships that are no longer happening? Why is that? Is all of a sudden nobody passing the ball to that person? You know, are they complaining about somebody, oh, well, they just said this because they're trying to get the starting lineup or whatever. And so if you're not educated on all this stuff that goes on behind that and how retaliation really works, you're not going to see it. And that's how perpetrators get away with it. And that's how the culture gets away with it too. You know, of we want to protect this person. And so the social capital is with this person. So we're going to team up against the person because we want to be with the social capital because everybody thinks this person is the important person. Because sexual assault is not about sex, it's about power. And so it's the person with the most power that is most likely going to do the most damage. And so especially on a sports team, you're going to look at more of the powerful people because that's the person that nobody's going to want to call out with, and that's the person that everybody's going to try to flock to. And then that's going to isolate that. And so the retaliation is so nuanced. It can be really tiny. When you report it, you're like, that's it? But it's also a pattern of behavior. It's not just one incident.
Are there resources that exist that are meant to help protect victims from retaliation or even their parents, their family members? Because sometimes we do see that retaliation come against the families as well.
You stumped us.
Right? I mean, unless you have a family lawyer, honestly, it's getting law on your side and teaming up with a good lawyer that can help you through that.
Which is very challenging.
Very challenging, because there's also far few in between folks who know about certain processes and procedures like Title IX, for example. Someone may be a lawyer, but it doesn't mean that they understand all of the law. And so there are certain lawyers that only specify in Title IX and may know how to navigate through that process and understand it from not only a federal level, but also how it integrates on a state level. So, it kind of depends.
Yeah, and a lot of times the perpetrators know it, so they can have an excuse of why it wasn't retaliation. It was these different things. I had to be at this party because of this thing, you know, or whatever. I had to be in this class because of this thing. But now at the class, I'm sitting next to you because I know it's intimidating you.
Yes.
And so it's hard to differentiate what is just a behavior and what's a retaliatory behavior. And so, I don't know it helps.
Kenyora, what is the gap that you see between victims and what they need in the aftermath of abuse and the resources that are available to them?
I would say the gap would be one, if they're being believed. That's the first, the first thing. Because oftentimes it depends on who the survivor is and what they look like and what their identity is. So you'll see, and I'm just going to say cisgender white women who will tend to get the most resources than that of not only a Black and brown person, but someone who may identify in the LGBTQIA space, someone who may be an immigrant, someone who may be a first generation, also students who may have disabilities or neurodivergence.
Absolutely.
And so the more of the compounding factors that you see in identities that one may hold, their resources may get smaller, which is actually mind-boggling to me.
Right. Kind of like the opposite. Yeah.
Exactly. But what we've found is that if you are cisgender, white, female, the resources come to you much faster. Whereas if you are, and I'm just going to speak from a Black woman's experience, if you're coming from that side of things, you're now often seen as either, oh no, that couldn't happen to you because you're strong, or you're adultified in some ways, or you're objectified in other ways, that people would automatically assume that either that's a part of your nature anyways, or you can get through it because of all the other things that you've gone through. And then there's a lack of resources because a lot of people who you're also disclosing to are not necessarily looking like you. So even those who hold power and are designated authorities, especially on a college campus, within the Title IX space, are not often Black women or other women of color. It's usually white women who are sitting in those roles. And so you're seeing someone who may not even believe you, because we often also come across Title IX coordinators who are also doing the victim blaming and shaming to students who are coming to disclose to them. And never mind the campus safety or police officers that you have on those campuses that are, historically from the Black community, you already have issues with that.
Right.
And so we're not trying to sometimes go through a system that we know or we feel is only going to portray us anyways. And so instead of, disclosing and reporting, you're like, I'm just going to sit with this because that's all I know how. Because if I do, you're not going to believe me anyways. Or sometimes people may have said things just to say, hey, this is what's going on, just like as little things, just to see how someone is going to handle that. And then just with those little things, sometimes it gives you an indicator. I can't even go to this person because if I went to them for this little thing, they're not going to believe me over here. And I'm not about to go to the police officer or the campus safety because they're not going to do anything for me because they're protecting the school. Or I'm not going to go to even the president of the college because, the president is thinking about reputation, maybe the bottom line of the institution versus the safety and well-being of their entire campus community. These blue lights on campuses are only going to do so much. Like we need far beyond blue lights on campuses. We need far beyond orientation as well. Like, or one training that happens maybe once a year. And that's really for staff of college campuses, not necessarily the students. And so there needs to be this like campus-wide system of training and education. And it's not just about educating on what things look like, but how can we prevent it? Because that's what we need to be talking about is prevention mechanisms, not always intervention. And sorry, I also lost track of the question.
That was amazing. I didn't even know where I was. That was just so good.
I was like, let me stop here.
What
am I talking about now?
Abby or Tracy, do you want to jump in with any other thoughts?
Again, I think we've had a lot of conversations together about the overall system. So you look at the criminal justice system, and it's not set up to support victims. The burden of proof is on the victim beyond a reasonable doubt. Within the athlete space, the systems oftentimes are separate from criminal or civil litigation or misconduct. It's a process unto itself. And so I think there's a lot of systems that exist, and none of them necessarily lean towards victim support. Certainly, I think there's a lot of processes and organizations out there that try to make these existing systems as, trauma, informed, victim-centered as possible, but there are limitations. And I think, I think it's going to take a larger, again, we talk about like cultural, and I've said it multiple times, a larger cultural and societal shift, but I think until these bigger systems have a very drastic change, that these smaller systems and processes and reporting mechanisms that also exist aren't going to be able to, make those changes as well.
They don't talk to each other.
They don't. Yeah.
I was just about to ask. Yeah,
They
what
don't.
is that?
Yeah.
What does that web look like?
There's no web.
There's no web.
No, it's very, it's because, I have to, when I'm, taking a report, it's very much a lot of my process is educating both parties about what our process looks like. And I think a lot of the times the assumption is we are a criminal kind of,
Process.
justice-based system or a criminal-based process, and it's the same. And I have to kind of provide education that's not the case for our, reporting and response. But I think, you're asking someone who has been a victim to then try to navigate all these different systems that don't talk to each other. And so then you just add one more experience to someone where you either have to continue to retell, you have to provide, evidence or concrete information to, this happened to me. And a lot of times that doesn't exist necessarily. And so decisions are being made based off of kind of, we need this and you can't provide it, so this is how we're going to go. So I think it's a very difficult system to navigate overall for people.
I want to add one thing about the barriers to getting resources. And because I think that what Kenyora said and even what you said are spot on. And if we go back to the technology and the digital space, people don't know how to find the resources.
Right.
And in our case, Meta often blocks our ads for being inappropriate, for using inappropriate language or being political.
The shadow banning.
So like sexual assault is political oftentimes. And so how do we get our resources into the hands of people that need them? And, a lot of people want to follow kittens and puppies and viral dances on social media. They don't want to follow organizations like ours. And so they don't know what to search for. They don't know, because going back to, might not even know what happened to them. And then they're just automatically not going to be believed, particularly in the case of women of color. And so I think part of it is women who look like me, cis white women who are in these positions, we need to do our own training. We need to understand the differences of different types of survivors coming to us. And we need to understand that it's not white women that we need to cater to. We need to cater to all women, but particularly those on the margins who do have a mistrust of police, I should say, who have not seen themselves, are not sure if you're a safe white woman to come towards and to report. And we need to acknowledge all of that, as well as the rates are higher for populations that are more marginalized.
Yeah. Reminds me of, the gun violence epidemic is very similar. It's, we think about focusing so much on school shootings and assault weapons, and 100% those are great things to focus on getting some legislation around. But the vast majority of gun violence is perpetrated in Black and brown communities. And those are the people who are most at risk and have the least number of resources. So there's a lot of parallels.
I also think we need to look at how resources are available to people. Because I think, in this, as we're talking about digital space, it's great because resources are more prevalent and more available, I think, to people. But I think then we have to look at accessibility.
Yes.
So are these resources not only available online, but available to people and communities in different ways? Whether that is, in multiple different languages, if they're printed materials, if they're ADA accessible. That I think, because a lot of the time we're like, this is great, we have a resource, and we kind of, direct people to it, but we forget those kinds of things with accessibility, or that not everybody has a smartphone, not everybody has access to the internet. So looking at ways, how do we get these resources to communities that might not necessarily have readily available access to them through either digital space or, being directly involved at a college or with an organization.
Yeah.
And to add to that, the complications in 2025 are resources are scrubbing their websites of Black and brown folks, of LGBTQ folks, of trans folks, because they're losing money from the federal government. They're scared for their safety sometimes. And so it's who do you center?
One of the things that really strikes me about In Rape on Campus, the tagline is, "We believe you." That is, in this moment, in this cultural moment and societal moment, that is more important than ever. Why was that so crucial as an organization to have that be absolutely central to your message?
I believe, well, one, our founders, who were college students themselves who experienced sexual assault, when they went to their respective institutions, they weren't believed. In fact, they were met with a lot of deliberate indifference by their institutions. And so they took it upon themselves to figure out what is something that we can use, because there's something here. There's got to be something here. And they came upon Title IX, which actually was not just about sex discrimination in the 1970s, but it was until the Clinton administration in the 1990s that Title IX could be used as a vehicle towards justice when there's sexual discrimination that's happening. And so now when we, progress further in the timeline to the 2010s, 2013s, we're seeing this uptick of students recognizing that they have rights under Title IX that they didn't think that they had before, because our founders were actually going across the country to different schools and educating students about their rights under Title IX and what that looks like. And so you start to see folks say, wait a minute, this actually happened to me. Oh, I'm not the only one in my peer group that's experienced this, because there's someone here who like sees me. Even if they're not directly talking to them, it's like you feel seen and you feel heard. And so for us, about believing survivors is like I said earlier, you're opening the door to possibilities. You're opening the door towards healing. Because if you don't open that door and believe first, you're basically shutting everything down in a survivor from their mental capacity, emotional capacity, maybe something financial, like anything that they're dealing with, you're just shutting it off just by not opening the door. And so I say to folks, if you have someone that you know you can trust and you know you can say whatever you need to say to them, go to that one person you know you can disclose to. And for the person who's receiving that disclosure, just listen.
Yeah.
That's all you need to do half the time is listen. And then meet them where they're at. Don't go into action mode like, oh my gosh, we got to do this. No. Just listen. And then you ask, what do you need from me in this moment? Because I want to be here for you and I want to support you. I believe you. What you experienced, you shouldn't have experienced. And what you experienced is not your fault.
Yes.
And you are not your experience. You just got to believe survivors.
Abby, I'm really thinking about this too on teams. Again, thinking about teams is like so often they feel like kind of a second family to us. Or for a lot of people, they feel more like a family to us than our actual blood family. Tell me what really good support looks like. So maybe after a victim has come forward and disclosed to sort of like one person, and they're discussing it in their circle, and they need support from just more than just that one person, but just kind of that inner circle in a team environment, in a sporting environment, thinking about all of the pressures that are at play and all the cultures that are at play. And the fact that you have, adults who might be kind of like looking in and seeing what happens too. What does really good support look like for a victim?
I think what Kenyora said is meeting somebody where they're at. So just having people around you that believe you and support you and say, I believe this happened to you. I believe this is your experience, and I support you in whatever decisions, that you make. I think in a team environment, as we talked about, there's that fear of, if I disclose, am I going to lose this for them? Are they going to lose the opportunity? And I think it's getting assurance from your team that this isn't, we support you, and no matter what the outcome, like that's not going to be your fault. This is not your fault. And I think, again, allowing them to be where they're at. So not necessarily, saying, hey, you need to go talk to them, or you need to disclose, or we have to tell coach. I think it's allowing them to make those decisions for themselves in the timeline that they are, ready to do that, but making sure that they're aware that these things exist for them and just continuing to support them through that. Because again, depending on your team, your family most of the time. And I think, through any process, especially that I've seen, is having somebody there for you to support you is everything. Even if it's just one person, the more the better. But I think just having that one person that, I'm believed, I trust them, they're going to, support me no matter what decision I make, whether it's I report now or I never report or I report in 30, 40 years. I think that's super important to have.
What would you say to somebody who might be watching this and maybe they want to speak out about something that they've personally experienced, or maybe they want to speak about something that they've witnessed a teammate experience, but they're scared to do it because they don't want to be seen as betraying their team? What would you say to that person?
Oh, I think that's tough because, again, if you witness something, that's their experience. And so I think, again, it's honoring that that's their experience and respecting that. But at the same time, I think and what I've seen is a struggle for witnesses of, I know this is bad, I know this is wrong. But again, I don't want to betray their trust. They are like my family. And so I think it's really allowing them to come to you, as a witness. I think sometimes I have people that will come and just kind of give that general, like, not full disclosure, but say, hey, like, I think I witnessed something and I'm not sure where to go. So it's having the available resources to say, if and when, you and the individual who's had this experience already, here are things that exist for you. And then certainly as the individual who's, a survivor or a victim of sexual assault or abuse, I think, again, it's allowing them that space and that time and the ability to, move on their own timeline. I certainly think when it impacts I think mental health and behavior. So you kind of mentioned, like, are they missing balls? I think it's okay to check in with people. I think sometimes people are too afraid of broaching difficult topics. And I've always, one of the first things I learned as a social worker working in mental health in hospitals is somebody told me, you have to be comfortable with the uncomfortable and having the tough conversations. But you can still have these tough conversations and be supportive and be that person for somebody and still have, you can't be afraid of having these conversations either. Because sometimes if you don't ask the direct question, or if you aren't willing to have these conversations, or just be known that you're willing to have these conversations, people will just kind of sit in their silence. And so I think too, there's that hesitation of like, well, this is uncomfortable for me. So I don't want to talk to them about it, or I don't want to ask the questions because that makes me uncomfortable. And I think as overall humans, we don't like to be uncomfortable. And it's not a comfortable experience or issue by any means. So I think it's just learning to be, comfort in the discomfort.
What do you view as the role of the governing bodies of the different sports? And maybe you can give us a little bit of just kind of brief education for people who might not be familiar with how those bodies are structured, and then tell us what you think the role is, both on the side of prevention and response and education for the governing bodies of each of the sports.
Yeah, I think for, governing bodies, it's to, provide that education and training. So certainly making sure that those resources are available in terms of, the resources that we've talked about, having your own policies and procedures available, making sure that people understand, again, like I said, part of my job when we get reports is to make sure people understand what our reporting and response process and the role that we play as a governing body. I think sometimes what a lot of people don't understand about governing bodies is that they aren't advocacy groups. And so they walk into the process of reporting and they said, there's an immediate assumption that, this is the governing body is serving as an advocacy kind of organization. And unfortunately, that's not the case. Their role is to be kind of that neutral party for both sides. So the complainant and then the respondent as well. Certainly I think that the process within a governing body, whatever that may be, can be, victim-centered, trauma-informed. But we do make sure there's a lot of education around, like, this is what the process looks for you. I think, transparency, communication about what that looks like and what to expect can be very helpful for people entering into that.
Yeah. In closing, And Tracy, I'd like to start with you. I would love to hear a story or an anecdote or a statistic that each of you can share with me from your various perspectives in how you work on this issue that makes you feel encouraged that what you are doing is having an impact.
So at Callisto, we have built technology to help connect survivors of serial perpetrators. So many times survivors have said, I wonder if my perpetrator has harmed somebody else. And we have built technology for them to be able to safely do that without disclosing and or reporting. They can report, they don't have to, and they can use our technology. And we had a survivor who matched on a college campus, and that person had been assaulted 2 years prior by a significant other. I have permission to share this story. And they questioned what happened to them because that person got drunk, went to a party, and then thought they did the right thing and asked their partner to take them home. And then they were assaulted. Their partner made all the excuses. They broke up. And then 2 years later, they found Callisto. And several months after that, they matched in our system. They didn't realize they were the only one. And that was life-changing. That person said that healing began. They let go of so much of the shame and the blame of I drank too much, I picked the wrong partner, maybe I was responsible for it, maybe what it was an assault. And they were able to report with multiple people on their campus that they had found that had been assaulted by the same person. That is the power of collective action. That is the power of survivors when you give them one tool to be able to connect in ways that they haven't before. And I think that just from what we do is so important because you can see so many different colleges have the coach that has assaulted hundreds of people, the doctor that has assaulted hundreds of people that they didn't know. They didn't know that there were other people, and they had no way of doing that because that social capital was not in their favor. And maybe they did report, many did, and they weren't believed because there isn't that web of connection that we think that there is. And we're giving them opportunities to do that, and we're providing education, and it's working. And the conversations that I was having 25 years ago when I started this, some are the same and some are so much different. And it's great that we can get to the deeper levels of that onion, the deeper layers of that onion to be able to start having different conversations because we are making progress. It's not quick enough. We're not making enough progress, but we are making progress, and it takes everyone.
Abby?
I think for me, it's, I feel a lot of success and happiness in seeing people more in the kind of prevention space where we start to have parents and other people come up and say, I didn't recognize this before, but now I do, and now I know. And I think that's important because a lot of the times once it gets to me, there's a reaction and it's not necessarily being proactive. And so I don't always get to see all the good, I mostly don't get to see the good outcomes. But just knowing out there that there are more people that are educated, that there are more people aware and willing to have these conversations with their athletes, with their coaches, and support them and believe them, to me, that's a success. And that, like I said, I don't get to see it as often as I would like, but I do get the moments where people come up and say, hey, like, this really helped me, or I learned something from this, or, this is going to make our program better. And just seeing them kind of like, I call it the light bulb moment, which maybe isn't the best term for it, but it's kind of that moment where I see all of this kind of fall into place for them. And you see them start to really put actions into place, preventative actions and education and training into place. So,
And really see their role.
Yeah. And understand what that role is. Because I think a lot of times people are very confused about like, what is my role as a coach or a parent or even an athlete on this team? And how do I, how do I put all these things into place? Because, I think we were talking, we have coaches that are just parents who are volunteers who have never played the sport or know anything about the sport. And they're just, hey, I'm just trying to step up for my kid and coach because they needed somebody. We're just a tiny program. And they don't think about all of these other things that could possibly happen. And so I think, having them have that understanding and then put into action, hey, we're going to get safeguarding policies into place. We're going to have education on our website. We're going to have stuff available for our athletes and our parents. I think that's huge.
Yeah, absolutely.
For us at NREAP on campus, what we notice is there's two things that typically students are asking for from their institutions: transparency and accountability. But when we think about college campuses and you think about, okay, going from high school to college, you're typically thinking about the cost of the program, if it's maybe a Division I school, what's the student to faculty ratio? You may be thinking about what type of student organizations you want to get involved with, Greek life, things of that nature. But we're not asking the questions of how well does the school do safety.
Yeah.
So we've actually created what's called a campus accountability map and tool, or CAMT. And essentially it empowers students and their families to basically be able to compare different sexual assault statistics, survivor support resources, prevention efforts that different colleges and universities may or may not have across the United States, including Puerto Rico and U.S. Virgin Islands, where they can see, what is the statistics saying about how, or the number of reports that this particular school has received on this particular sexual assault statistic, like stalking or fondling or things of that nature. And then what are the policies that they may or may not have in place in terms of the policies and procedures or the particular roles that someone may hold on an institution's campus. So now you're a high school student who is been able to say, okay, yep, you might be number one in this, you might cost this, and you check all the boxes I want. But I'm not so sure about this statistic here, which what we have found is for institutions that may have a higher number in a certain statistic, it's not indicative that they necessarily have an issue. It's actually that they're putting parameters in place that allow students to disclose because they feel safer. Whereas an institution that may have lower numbers, when you know that there is an issue, you're like, okay, yeah, you're doing something wrong here.
Interesting.
And so the map and tool has actually been built by survivors for survivors. So we've had students, lawyers, parents, pretty much anyone you can think of come together and actually build the map and tool, put together what should we be asking, what should be on this tool to make it accessible to anyone. And so it's our way of saying this tool is going to evolve over time. We're going to create new features on it, maybe a rating or ranking system, not so sure yet. But that particular feature will have criteria that is built up by survivors because they know what they've experienced. And so it's another way of them kind of giving back to maybe an institution that they have attended or just the larger picture above all. But we've had parents who've been able to beta test the map and tool and say, I wish I had this when I was in college. Or I have current college students who are like, I'm so glad I'm building this because we need this, we need that, and all of the things. And then there's some students who haven't experienced that are glad that they have this tool because they now know what to look for and what to ask, especially when you're going on college campuses and you're doing the tours. And a lot of parents are like, I'm not sure what I should be asking. Because typically you're like, oh, how big is the field? And do you have this type of sport here? Versus so in terms of sexual assault, where would my daughter or my son or my child, go to?
Yeah.
How do you guys handle this in this particular way? Who's the Title IX coordinator? And half the time when you're on a campus tour, they don't even know those answers. So that's the other educational component that we're also thinking about is how to give tools and resources to folks who are giving out campus tours to say, this is what you should know of your own campus, aside from the fun stuff. You should be able to say, here's how we approach safety and wellness for our entire community.
Yeah. It has been absolutely my honor and pleasure to get to share the table with you three incredible women doing such incredible work. Thank you so much for sharing a little bit of your brain power and your wisdom and your creativity with us and with the world. Thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you.
Yes.